And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. In everyday speech, people may use lots of different terms or words. Street children or homeless youth may be used interchangeably, but there are some differences. Not all children who are homeless end up living in the open on the street. Many end up sleeping in very inappropriate or out-of-sight places. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this 2001 story.
It's estimated that there are currently about 30 to 40 kids and teens living on the streets in Prince Rupert, a number which can balloon to about 100 in the summer. Miles Moreau and Catherine Bellefontaine of Prince Rupert Reconnect Services work on the front lines, trying to help the kids get off the street. They took us on a tour of a well-known hiding place called The Brick.
Okay, so what is this place here, Miles?
Oh, it's another little, what would they call a party area where the kids come, they hide out. There has been a lot of sexual activity around here, a lot of group meetings, and again, kids putting themselves at risk and making it very uncomfortable for people who used to walk through here and enjoy their family outings. And
I see we got a lot of debris here, and actually I was just going to mention, I see we've got a couple toys that were left behind.
Yeah, again, some paraphernalia from the hard drugs. My fear with that is some kid will pick it up, not consider the risk factor. They start getting into tattooing, doing self-tattooing, and or maybe just pricking their fingers or something, and not knowing what is available. We are called upon to come pick some of these things up. People just page us and give us an address, and again we find them out in the open like this.
Moreau and Bellefontaine visit The Brick on a regular basis. They say there have been nights when they've found up to 40 kids at the site, and we found the evidence.
It looks like we've got someone that's actually squatting here in the woods. Is this common, or?
Well, it's common for people to be staying in these areas, but this is a completely new site to us, and I think we're as shocked as you are to see it. Again, you can see that somebody is still existing here and urban squatting, basically.
Now we're not sure whether this is a young person or whether it's an adult, but if it were a young person, what would bring them to this point? How do they get to this point?
Nowhere else to go. That is why we need a safe house. That's why we need shelters in this town for the homeless of all ages. In this day and age, this should not exist. This is really appalling. We have people with money in town. We have empty buildings. This really, really, really acknowledges the split between the haves and the have-nots, and those people that refuse to believe that poverty like this exists in this town. This is very appalling to me.
Now, most of the kids that we're talking about, what age range are we talking about here?
Well, you're starting at 12, 13 years of age. We chased a 12-year-old last year for quite a while, and then this was her hideout. And up to 17, 18 years of age. Again, they meet here, and then they learn off each other, and they support each other, and it's almost like a family. They run like in packs, for a support system.
If you look at those runners, the runners are really small. They're not an 18 or 19-year-olds, males runners, that's for sure. Those are adult runners.
Now, the kids that end up to this point, is it just a bad situation at home that got them here, or?
Sometimes, yeah. Quite often it is a bad situation, and who are they going to turn to? If they are 16 or 17, there's nowhere for them to go. MCF can't really do much about them because of the age. They can't go on independent living. I think we're bringing it up here, but then there's rules that go with it. These kids have been without rules for a long time. It's really hard to adjust.
Now, you mentioned the issue of a safe house. How would a safe house work?
It would be a place where if a kid calls us, they've got nowhere to go, we can just take them there. We don't have to contact anyone. It's already funded. It's staffed. It has a laundry facility. It would have a kitchen. They could make themselves something to eat.
Have counseling components to go with it, and again, give them some time where they are off the street and they can get themselves a little healthier physically and again, healthier mentally. And
What type of situations are they getting into? Is it a matter of they're getting into prostitution? Are there drugs or substances involved?
Well, I would say from looking around that something from the 60s and 70s are back, and that's the sniffing or huffing.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Living on the streets in an unstable or predatory environment puts young people at risk of developing many health problems. Studies carried out among Canadian street youth report high rates of sexually transmitted diseases and blood-borne infections. Let us return to the archives with Catherine and Miles.
What other types of things do the kids get into?
There's alcohol, drug, and more than likely prostitution, because that's where they'll get a warm bed. It's wet out here today.
Are there predators out there that are taking these people in, or?
There's lots of predators out there.
what I call them male vultures, basically, and again, that age of consent has opened a lot of doors for them, and they come in all sizes and different suits and jeans and whatever, so there's no boundaries there whatsoever.
A lot of these kids act tough. They give the appearance of being tough, but they're really, really vulnerable. They're scared.
How do they get involved in this? I mean, in regards to the male predators that you refer to that bring them in, are they offering them a place to sleep, or?
They would offer them a place to sleep, something to eat, alcohol, drugs. Like you said, these kids, if they've come from really abusive families or poor families, they are really gullible to adults. These predators, for one thing, are very aware of how to check out a kid, how to read a kid to see where their weak spots are, and they target them.
It's scary because there's so many people out at that crowd that want to pick them up and, you know, get them hooked on cocaine. I have a 13-year-old cousin living in Prince Rupert that was picked up while she was drunk about 2 months ago now and was given cocaine, and she's now hooked on it. And they're now telling her that she has to go and sell herself to pay for the cocaine that she snorted. And she's only 13 years old.
Cassandra Milnes and Carrie Dick both lived on the streets at one point in their lives. They were kind enough to share their stories with us.
I was 11, and I thought that my living environment was unstable. I had a heroin addict mother who would come and go as she pleased, a father who worked, because this is a fishing community. I had a father who worked 9 months out of the year, so I was bounced back and forth between foster homes during those 9 months, to my aunt's home, to just basically to whoever who would take me. And I thought that, you know, nobody loved me, nobody cared, and it was an unsuitable environment for me to be, and I thought that my friends who were on the streets would care for me more, so I left home. I was 11, I had nowhere to stay, nowhere to live. There was a group of about 20 of us, all ranging from the age of 11 to about 15, and we stayed in a place that's called the Dynamite Shack, which is a giant cement building out on the just at the base of the mountain here, which is a 20-minute walk from the road from the Civic Center. And we lived out there for 2 months during the winter when it was cold, and we would huddle together to stay warm. And it was horrible.
I was living in a village at the time, and by the age of 12, I had to start stealing to provide anything for myself. I had started to do drugs, I started to drink. My life wasn't going in a very good direction, and I one day looked in the mirror after a very long night of hard partying, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't want to be that for the rest of my life. I didn't want to wake up and wonder where to go, what to eat. Who's going to care?
Milnes and Dick say there is a definite lack of help available for kids that end up on the streets in Prince Rupert, and residents better start opening their eyes to the problem.
But a lot of people are turning a blind eye to the problems that are happening in the streets to our youth. And because of it, it's only gotten worse. There's limited help out there, even for people like Miles and Catherine. There's limited funding, there's limited help, there's limited organizations that are willing to care. And I think it's high in time that Prince Rupert found out what's happening to their children.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. In British Columbia, water has always provided an essential source of food for Indigenous people. Oolichans is a traditional and staple source of food for Northwest Coast First Nations. Once plentiful in over 30 river systems, the Oolichans now returns to only 3 Canadian rivers and 2 in Alaska. Let us return to the archives with fisheries biologist John Kielsen.
All along the west coast, they can't help but wonder if it's just a blip on the way down rather than any kind of recovery.
Oolichans throughout their distribution from Alaska to California are declining. In many places they've completely crashed and there's been no run for at least 2 years. And we think that most of the spawners are 3 years old. So if they don't come back for the 3rd year, then we're in big trouble. And so in this area, last 2 years there was very little, but in '98 there was a pretty decent run. So probably the fish from that '98 run are coming back this year, but they're not coming back as strong as they did in '98. So even though it's a decent run, it's still kind of less than it should be.
Oolichans are a staple food for many First Nations along the BC coast, and they're a critical part of the ecosystem.
They come at a time when most of the animals that eat Oolichans have been starving for the winter, and they're just gearing up for reproduction now. So here comes this incredibly nutritious, abundant, easy to get food, and they sort of like the spark plug in the whole system. So the sea lions come and feed on them before they go to their offshore grounds where they have their babies, and they otters and seals and eagles and all kinds of birds and sturgeon and a lot of different kinds of fish, halibut, are all eating Oolichans. So if you take that part of the food chain away, then a lot of other animals are going to suffer.
On the Skeena River, the Tsimshian are putting a lot of effort into research this year, trying to estimate the size of this run.
What we do is we catch adults during the spawning, and then from those adults we look at them and we figure out their age, length, weight, and their fecundity, it's called. That basically means how many eggs are there in females. Then we take samples of the water as the eggs incubate, then they start to hatch. Then we catch samples of all those larvae that come floating down the river, and we try to estimate the total production of larvae. And then we figure out how many females did it take to lay that many eggs, and that's how we estimate run size.
We've caught up with the Tsimshian fisheries technicians toward the end of the Oolichans run, and they aren't catching many adults.
The males will have this long protruding muscle on the side of the fish, and the females will be kind of round, a lot shinier, a lot prettier looking than the males. The males will get dark and rough, and they'll have this big protruding muscle on the side. This one here could be it's hard to say until we actually do an aging through the otolith, but I'd say he's maybe about a 5-year-old in that age class.
Next, the crew takes a sample for eggs and larvae. The trolling equipment includes a flow meter, so they can calculate the volume of water they're sampling.
This is our sample that we'll bring back to analyze.
The technicians are also recording the temperature of the river at different spots and its salinity. They think Oolichans may spawn when the temperature reaches 3 degrees. The last part of today's survey is done by snorkeling.
With the snorkeling part of it, we'll try and look for and identify the spawning beds of the Oolichans. So once we identify the mats or their spawning beds, then for future we could make recommendations to any kind of alteration to habitat in that area.
Thanks to efforts like these, scientists know more about Oolichans today than they did 6 years ago. But there are still huge gaps in the research, and there isn't much funding for more. Concerns about that shortage of research were raised at a workshop on Oolichans in Terrace last year.
When there's gaps in research, it upsets the conclusions that can be drawn, so the research becomes mainly ineffectual. So yes, somewhere down the line, we're going to have to come to grips with a greater research effort.
Doug Hay is the federal government's top guy in Oolican research. He works at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo and had a budget of just over $20,000 last year.
All we are doing is trying to estimate the abundance of Oolichans in the Fraser, accumulate information from other rivers. We are examining and quantifying the bycatch of Oolichans, or the Fisheries and Oceans is doing that in the shrimp fleet.
Many First Nations representatives at this workshop pointed fingers at the shrimp trawlers offshore for catching too many Oolican. But Hay isn't ready to place blame for Oolican run failures anywhere in particular yet.
If you look at it from a so-called ocean basin scale, if you look at it from the point of view of what's happening in the entire North Pacific, the first thing that you would conclude is that there's something happening in the ocean, and the factor there would be something related to climate change or changes within the ocean, because we see some fairly large changes happening in other species. At the same time, if you look at changes within individual rivers, there are a number of factors that make sense as factors explaining changes in oil abundance within rivers. Some of the factors within rivers change. There's the effect of forest industry practices in some rivers, some concerns about pollution in other rivers, and associated habitat loss.
Pollution has been an issue for the Haisla. Pulp mill effluent has tainted Oolican in the Kitimat River since the 1970s. It's too early to tell how the runs in Haisla territory will be this year, but in addition to the Skeena, there is some good news elsewhere. On the Nass, some Nisga'a people say they've managed to fill their bins in 5 days this year instead of the 10 it took last year. That may be because there's less ice on the river, and the Nass hasn't suffered in the recent past as other rivers have. In the United States, the 2001 run in the Columbia River is reported as good, the best they've seen since the early 1990s. And back in BC, a modest fishery is expected on the Fraser. It's too early for conclusions from Alaska or BC's other Oolican rivers. Results of this year's fishing and research will be shared at a workshop planned by the Native Brotherhood of BC in May. The Oolican Conservation Society, formed last year, will also help researchers trade data, while it calls for funding for more Oolican research.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The first belly dancers were a group of traveling dancers known as a Faresi. These women were considered gypsies in Egypt in the 18th century and were banished from Cairo during the 1830s. In this final segment of Open Connection, Rose Weaver shares why she loves belly dancing.
Yeah, okay, sure. And then I was like, wow, did I just say that? So anyway, and then it took off from there, and I borrowed her videos and basically learned from there.
Rose Weaver suggested belly dancing to her dance group, and now she holds classes in Telkwa for other dance lovers. Reaction, she says, is mixed.
I get everything from, hey, wow, that sounds great, to, oh, my wife would like to try that.
Belly dancers sometimes wear costumes like hip scarves. These can help accent moves called shimmies.
Or four shimmies, just get your knees going straight, and then they bend back and forth.
Fashion aside, belly dancing can help you get over self-consciousness in a hurry.
There's a certain amount of body acceptance that goes with the belly dancing, or body awareness, that you have to be comfortable with your body.
A lot of the steps include hip or chest moves. These take some getting used to, as I found out firsthand.
So chest circles. So stick your stomach out, and then to the right, to the back, to the left, and forward. Side, back, left, forward. Am I doing it? Yeah?
Then come the hips.
It's good to try and do this without moving the upper body. You want to learn these moves in isolation to start.
There are hip lifts and hip drops. All this abdomen work is part of the reason belly dancing can be great exercise.
Oh yeah, muscles that I'm learning to be aware of that, oh, okay, this pelvic muscle, doing these different pelvic moves, and especially the rib circles and these upper stomach muscles. I didn't even know I had like muscles up here.
Other moves include graceful flowing arms. Well, maybe Rose's arms are more graceful than mine. Then there's footwork, usually small steps in dancing sandals or bare feet. Once you've got some of these moves down, you can add turns using hips or chest as accents.
Just like with the shoulder, you might go dun 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 dun.
And for Rose, belly dancing has turned into a spousal affair. Her husband has picked up percussion duties for her.
Well, of course, he enjoys. He says, "Oh, it's really neat watching you." And he says, but he really likes drumming with me.
She says belly dancing, with all its benefits, is suitable for anyone.
Watching the belly dance, going to some workshops and watching these women dance, the bigger women, bigger belt women look just as good as the skinny ones. And so that was another aspect of belly dancing, which is nice. It's acceptable for all women's body types.
There were over 800 construction workers in Camano at the peak of activity. The Sewakin camp now resembles a ghost town. Only a handful of people working for a company with a maintenance contract are still there. The place looks like the biggest Ford dealership in the north, with dozens and dozens of trucks and other vehicles up on blocks. The new powerhouse, where up to 180 people a day were working, is in a state of suspended animation. The transformer gallery has turned into a kind of storage tomb for all kinds of parts and equipment. And some of the transformers that should have been installed by now sit outside in a containment site. Most of the materials need continuing care and maintenance.
If we want to maintain any type of a warranty, especially with the critical electrical equipment, we have to ensure that there's certain precautions taken when the equipment is both received and inspected throughout the life of the suspension. So what our contractor will do under our guidance is take this apart and ensure that, say, silica gel is maintained up to date, that the packaging is kept so that there's no humidity or no moisture, creating a situation that will make some of the equipment rust, as an example.
Sprinkler systems, storage buildings, containment dikes, it all adds up to a great deal of money that will produce no lasting benefit to the project in the end. With no experience in mothballing such a huge hydro development, many of the snags just couldn't be foreseen.
I don't think we anticipated most of what's going on now. Most of the equipment and materials that's coming in for the turbines and generators, I don't think anybody really anticipated exactly what we would get into. Since we've suspended 2 years ago, we've taken delivery of the 12,000 tons I was talking about. That involved almost 200 containers. These are 20 and 40-foot containers. Involved almost 200 trailers of material. It's an enormous amount of material for group that's supposed to be suspended.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.